Is there a series, is there a set of criteria capable of shaping the basis for an evaluation of whether and to what extent a financial asset can support sustainability goals? The answer is yes. There is, but the point is that there are maybe 20 different sustainable finance taxonomies. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. I don't know how to greet you all, because you are, maybe there are, as far as I know, at least 260 attendees from all over the world for this event that the Italian Network for Sustainable Finance, the ESGeneration Italy, has decided to promote today. What is the ESGeneration Italy? It is a network of different organizations that about a year ago decided to gather and to shape this new network for sustainable finance in Italy. So good morning, good afternoon, good night from Gianfrancesco Rizzuti. I'm one of the representatives of this Italian network, and I will shortly introduce this webinar of today, which is dedicated to the search for a common ground, a taxonomy of taxonomies, we could say, around the world. About 20 different taxonomies have been inventoried in the world right now, and here we are today with some very outstanding representatives of different financial centers around the world. So, but first of all, I will shortly introduce the program of the day, and mainly Stephen Nolan, who is the managing director of the Financial Center for Sustainability, the network promoted by the United Nations, to which our domestic and national network adheres. So, Stephen, I think that I can give you the floor.
Great, thank you, sir. You can hear me okay? Great. Look, I'm unfortunately not in beautiful Milan today. I'm in Dublin, where it's raining, but that's what's new in Ireland. It is a real pleasure to be here with you all today, and amazing to know that over 200 people from around the globe are involved and participating today. So first and foremost, thank you for including United Nations Development Programme Financial Centres for Sustainability in today's session. FC4S was developed as a result of Italy's G8 presidency in 2018, so it's thrilled to be actually supporting our colleagues in Milan. And today, FC4S is an active network of over 35 financial centres working together on this agenda all around the world. And as I noted earlier on, an important topic that we're discussing today, congratulations to our partner, ESGeneration Italy, for organising this important session. And as noted, it is great to be joined by so many leading financial centres around the world, the UK, Canada, Mexico, and China, and looking forward to hearing what my colleagues will be talking about after I say my few remarks. Regarding today's session, the focus of today's session towards a global taxonomy, state of the art and key experiences across the world, it is great that we are able to come together and discuss this important topic. Among our members, and I'll get to this a little bit more in a moment, but among our members, top challenges that we see are lack of talent, and how can we develop talent in this space? Data is also a big challenge, but fundamentally, will we see at a global level a convergence of key policy and regulatory action in this agenda? And the reason for that is that capital is global, and capital needs to flow to the jurisdictions where it's needed most. And if we saw anything out of the recent COP27, a lot of those jurisdictions are in the emerging markets as well. So thus, for us and for our members, standardization is a key priority to develop and grow sustainable finance markets, to support the achievement of environmental and other sustainable development goals in the SDGs. The complexity and differences among taxonomies can create challenges for investors, particularly international investors. As I noted, capital is global. And to ensure equal competition and legal certainty for all companies operating in the capital flows projects, the capital flow to projects that stand out positively, harmonization of taxonomies is essential. So again, if you look at who we have on the call with us today, the UK, Canada, Mexico, and China, all jurisdictions that have their own net zero goals and need finance, public and private, to finance that. But then in particular, if you look at the UK and London, a global financial centre, and a lot of the capital of the UK is global in nature and looking for projects around the world as well. Hence the importance of that standardisation. In fact, the multiplicity of frameworks and standards aimed at promoting transparency and disclosure is becoming, or has been, a barrier to the effective comparability and integration of sustainability-related factors into the investment decision-making process. And what we're seeing is increased confusion, and as a result of this increased confusion, this results in an increased risk of greenwashing, again, which was a big topic of discussion on Finance Day at COP27 on the 8th of November. Both the UN Secretary General's task force on this topic and the UK government both came out with reports about greenwashing, and it's very clear that there's zero tolerance for greenwashing going forward. And greenwashing effectively is hindering sustainable capital mobilization and blocking the alignment of international resources and institutional capital with sustainable development goals. And if we look at the number of taxonomies, and I believe, I was listening to Dr. Mal Zhong, who Chen Lin works with as a colleague recently, and I think he highlighted that there's over 200 existing taxonomies in the world, which is just staggering when one thinks about it, all with their own complexities and differences, which create challenges again for international investors and for jurisdictions to promote themselves as location for that capital. And so, interestingly, with today's session, and again, hats off to our colleagues in ESGeneration Italy, better comparability and interoperability are core enablers of international finance globally, and in particular, working towards consistency across the development of standards, taxonomies, and guidelines is a top priority in advancing sustainable finance. FCFRES undertakes an annual assessment program with our members, and the results from late last year for the latest survey show that half of our members, or 52%, indicated that working towards consistency across the development of standards, taxonomies, and guidelines was a top priority. So this derives fundamentally in the urgency of streamlining them and working towards attaining a certain level of interoperability. And this is why the work on the Common Ground taxonomy, which I think Chen Lin and colleagues may speak to later on, is quite important. It's a comprehensive, factual, activity by activity mapping activity and comparison of two cases between Europe and China, which can be used to compare other taxonomies and identify comparabilities and help and boost interoperabilities. So again, as we've noted through my few remarks, I have to take my hat off to our colleagues in Italy to focus in on this topic, to bring together the UK, Mexico, Canada, and China, where all different activities are underway in this space, to start identifying what is best practice in this area. And perhaps with FCFRES support, on the back of what we hear today, perhaps we could do a short note back into certain of our colleagues in different jurisdictions around the world, including the Commission, to say that, look, we've held this event. It's important to see what is happening. Financial centres are key players in the global market and have a role in this urgent matter. We need to be at the core of coordinating, along with the policymakers, regulators, and market actors, the consistent approaches to taxonomies, where we can minimise risks of green and SDG washing. One of the last things I made, colleagues, we also provide a secretary to the Sustainable Finance Development Network, which is the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation Platform for Sustainable Finance, where we advise the 21 finance ministers in that space. And it's important that we also, one of our work streams is on taxonomies, and we provide input back to those ministers. So to conclude, forgive me if I've run over, it is hard to kind of even enumerate the benefits that the interoperability of taxonomies, as well as consistency of sustainability data which they require, could deliver. But to put it simply, from an FCFRES perspective, their combination is conducive to creating more reliable tools in financial markets, such as benchmarks and labels for sustainable financial instruments, bond standards, and even the currently so widespread transition plans. Again, another thing that really came to the fore during COP27. They ultimately strengthen the quality and reliability of the markets and creates a virtual circle promoting more ambitious and consistent sustainable finance policies, and fundamentally unlocking more capital at an increased level to support national decarbonisation efforts, the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. So thank you for including FCFRES, and I look forward to listening to the rest of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I mean, I couldn't have made a better introduction to our date than yours. So thank you very much. I mean, I personally joined your global event in Casablanca some weeks ago, and you made a very, very good job together with our friends from some of the financial centers that will join the today's discussion. So I will leave the floor now to Andrea Gasperini for his keynote speech. Andrea is the head of Sustainability and ESG Observatory of the Italian Association of Financial Analysts, as well as a member, as an outstanding member of the European ESG expert team of the European Federation of Financial Analysts. So, Andrea, I think that you are ready for your overview on what's going on in Europe and maybe also in some other areas of the world concerning this search for a global and a common ground of languages. Please.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to present this. I will convert the screen just a moment. Okay, do you see my screen now? Okay, then during this webinar, on behalf of FeBAF, I will talk about the 3 objectives of the EU Action Plan Financing Sustainable Growth. Reorient capital flows towards sustainable investment in order to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth. Manage financial risk stemming from climate change, resource depletion, environment degradation, and social issues, and foster transparency and long-termism in financial and economic activities related to the EU-level taxonomy of economic activities that can be considered sustainable from both an environmental and a social point of view. A shift of capital flows towards more sustainable economic activities must be based on a shared understanding of the term sustainable, a unified EU-wide system or taxonomy that precisely defines which activities can be considered sustainable is one of the most urgent steps of the action plan. The activities that can be defined sustainable contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as other 4 objectives of the environmental taxonomy and the 3 objectives of the social taxonomy described by the Platform on Sustainable Finance. To better understand which activities can be considered sustainable, the companies must inform investors and offer detailed indications on relevant sectors based on precise selection criteria, thresholds, and metrics. The EU taxonomy is a classification system that provides businesses, investors, and policymakers with appropriate definitions of which economic activities can be considered environmental sustainable. In this way, it creates security for investors, protects private investors from greenwashing, helps companies become more climate friendly, mitigates market fragmentation, and helps shift investment to where they are most needed for carbon emission and greenhouse effects reduction. For each product, financial market participants must be able to communicate how and to what extent the taxonomy has been used to determine the sustainability of the investment and loans, which environment objectives the investments and loans contribute to. In particular, banks must communicate the green asset ratio, GAR, and more recently, the book taxonomy aligned ratio, with which the proportion of assets that are environmentally sustainable contribute to the first 2 objectives of the mitigation and climate change adaptation. Such a disclosure should also include detailed information on the respective proportion of transitional and enabling activities. With reference to the taxonomy, in the current phase, the environment dimension is certainly in the foreground. The regulation defining the taxonomy entered into force on 12 July 2020, and each policy are included in the list called the EU Taxonomy Compass, is described in relation to its capacity to mitigate and adapt to the climate change, the first two of the 6 environment objectives of the European Union taxonomy. The scope of application of Delegated Act of 90 December 2021 already includes around 30% of companies listed on the stock exchange belonging to sectors that are responsible for almost 18% of direct greenhouse gas emissions in Europe. To be compatible with the environment, therefore, an economic activity must contribute positively to at least one of the 6 environment objectives and not produce negative impacts on any other objectives, and be carried out in compliance with minimum social guarantees such as the guidelines of United Nations and the business and human rights. On 29 March 2022, the European Expert Group Platform on Sustainable Finance published its report on a future extended environment taxonomy. The report aims to support the European Commission as it assesses whether and how to extend the taxonomy to the company activities. The platform recommends introducing new categories into the taxonomy and scaling its approach so as to potentially cover the entire economy. To facilitate understanding of this new structure, the report recommends using a traffic light color scheme which could easily and universally understood. Red 1. Activities that significantly damage the environment and which should be abandoned. Red 2. Activities that significantly damage the environment that can move to a greater sustainability. Amber. Intermediate performance would concern activities that have a significant impact on the environment, but which do not significantly damage or sustainably contribute to the environmental sustainability objective. Green. Sustainable activities which meet all the environmental sustainability requirements set out in the taxonomy, and at the end not classified activities with low environment impact. This category would include activities that do not have the potential to contribute substantially to nor significantly harm environmental sustainability. The platform on sustainable finance, the group of experts that has the task of helping and advising the European Commission on sustainable finance policies, published the awaited report on the social taxonomy on 28 February 2022. In this report, the platform proposed the structure for the social taxonomy, which will now have to be examined by the Commission, which has not yet expressed its opinion on that matter. The objective of the social taxonomy is to clearly establish what a social investment is and which economic activities can be considered socially sustainable, as has been done with environment investment. For example, activities that in themselves have a positive social impact, such as medical or pharmacological research, or activities that favor others or to obtain social benefits, or those aimed to reducing negative impacts on workers, consumers, and communities. The development of a social taxonomy, therefore, represents a further important step to promote respect for human rights and better working conditions, which will accompany the net zero transition to ensure that is a just transition. As in the green taxonomy, economic activities must be able to provide a substantial contribution to at least one of the three social objectives: decent work, decent living standards for consumers, inclusive and sustainable communities. As with the environmental taxonomy, they do not the principle must be applied so that none of the three main objectives is significantly compromised by a business activity. Having acknowledged that the setting of the social taxonomy follows that of the environmental taxonomy, how the two taxonomies interact with each other? Many economic activities that have a negative impact on the environment can also have a positive impact on the community in the creation of jobs, in the production of social useful goods and services, as well as contributing to taxation and therefore to welfare. Furthermore, activities or financial products that are environmentally sustainable may not be socially sustainable. For example, if the salaries of the employees are low or the working conditions are not suitable. In absence of a standardized long-term matrix, an imbalance between green and social investments could even arise if banks and asset managers are able to positively display green investment in their documentation and in the ratio of green assets, but not in the social ones. There is not only a lack of data on how socially compliant these activities are, but the banks will not choose to invest in socially sustainable activities. In extreme cases, this could even lead to higher financial flows going more green than social. A complete turnaround will hardly be possible, but I think the one-sided incentivization of environmental issues will not be sustainable in the long term. Just over a year behind us, we are starting now to live in the different world, but the European Commission has yet to define 4 of the 6 objectives formulated in the taxonomy regulation. On February 24, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. The energy crisis is triggering a rethinking of sustainable investments. 2/3 of Europe is under some sort of drought warning in what is probably the worst such event in 500 years. High inflation is starting to look less temporary than initially expected. The inclusion in the environmental taxonomy of natural gas and nuclear power labeled as sustainable activities was highly criticized. The tax issues is now starting to be considered as a question of sustainability. All this could be the cause of a deferment of the current social taxonomy as designed by the platform, and the European Commission has already started to consider further legislation other than the social taxonomy. Okay, thank you for your attention. And at the end, you have a slide about my bibliographic reference that I use to present this webinar.
So thank you, Andrea. I think that after Andrea's exhausting and comprehensive presentation, I mean, all the attendees can grasp one more reason why we, as this national domestic platform for sustainable finance, which is ESGeneration Italy, which is again promoted by the Italian Stock Exchange, Borsa Italiana SPA, by the Forum per la Finanza Sostenibile, the Italian forum, or the Italian multi-stakeholder forum for the sustainable finance, under the which, and we thank Francesco Picciato, who will conclude our webinar, under the which aegis we are holding this seminar within the weeks of the social responsible investment in Italy. And of course, the third member of the ESGeneration Italy is the Italian Federation of Banking, Insurance and Finance, and I am representative of this FeBAF Federation. So I give the floor now to Alessandra, who's going to moderate the roundtable, and I hope to see you, again very soon. Thank you very much, everybody.
Grazie Gian. Thank you, and good afternoon, all our audience. Andrea Gasperini has provided us with a clear and articulated picture of what EU taxonomy is today and challenges faced to move toward an enlarged idea of taxonomy, which should include the S pillar as well. But sustainable taxonomy is not only a European issue. The topic is debated in many other geographies with different nuances, but with a strong common roots and common final objectives to be reached, as we heard from Stephen Nolan, FC4S. And for this reason, it is with enormous pleasure that I'm going to moderate a panel to learn more of what's happening across the world. Here with me today, 4 distinguished speakers representing 4 sustainable financial centers, all part of FC4S, the global network of financial centers, which has ESGeneration Italy as the Italian representative. Let me introduce you. Alba Aguilar, Chief Executive Officer, Consello Consultivo de Finanzas Verdes. Good morning, Alba. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, Alessandra.
Ryan Jude, Program Director, Green Finance Institute. Good morning. No, good afternoon for you.
Good afternoon.
Good morning for Alba, who is based in Mexico, and good afternoon for you, Ryan. You are in the UK. Cheng Lin, International Collaboration Research Center Director, Institute of Finance and Sustainability. For you is good evening, Cheng Lin.
Good morning to you, and good evening to anyone else.
And last but not least, Florian Ruella, Vice President, Sustainable Finance Montreal.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to all of you. I suggest, if you don't mind, a very quick first round table to briefly introduce yourself and your Sustainable Financial Center. Alba, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you for the ESGeneration Italy for the invitation. And for me, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And the Green Finance Advisory Board is a financial center for Mexico City, and is a non-profit association representing the Mexican financial sector, and that promotes best practices in sustainable finance, capacity building, the articulation of agendas for each sector, and the mobilization of capital to enable market transformation. The Green Finance Advisory Board is currently confirmed by more than 90 top executives whom represent over 300 institutions with assets under management equivalent to 25% of our GDP. In our main objectives is to start in the dialogue between different actors and financial associations in order to promote the sustainable finance towards assets and projects that generate positive impacts on the environment and the society as a whole. We create we try to create concessions over the necessity of identify, quantify, and managing new opportunities and financial risk related to environmental, social, and corporate governance factors. And we also propose incentives and mechanisms that provoke favorable change in the market practices, investment vehicles, financial instruments, and current regulations. We also carry out a strategic alliance with international institutions and experts in sustainable finance in order to strengthen the creation of local capacities through the exchange of better practices and specialized financial education. We also coordinate dialogue with regulators, supervisors, governments, and stakeholders in order to present the financial market vision, articulating the agendas of each sector with proposals that permit a significant advance in sustainable finance in our country. And finally, strengthen the sustainable finance market infrastructure through the construction of the offer and demand with scale and integrity, working on standards, tools, and methodologies that any efficient market needs. We have 4 working groups. As I said, we have the main financial association with pension funds, commercial banks, insurance companies, investment banking, also independent advisor, private equity, the development banking and multilateral banking, the credit rating agencies, the second opinion providers, also some issuers, and Green Infrastructure Association. We have also special consultants. We work with 4 working groups. One works, the first one works on standards, product, and market, and we collaborate in the development and implementation of national standards and taxonomies, identify green and sustainable activities, and develop the label financial products, and analyze and monitor the state of the market. We have another group related with public policy. We are in a very continuous dialogue with authorities, market regulators, and national governments to collaborate in the development of the sustainable finance agenda. And one of the main tasks is the development of the national taxonomy. And the third group is education and communication, and we try to develop capabilities among professionals in financial sector through our Institute of Sustainable Finance and Education offer that integrates academic programs, courses, webinars, and certifications. And the last working group is sustainable finance, and we promote the market development through the new instruments that we have in the market and investment vehicles with ESG criteria dedicated to increasing the mobilization of capital to green and sustainable assets and projects. And that's our main work that we have in Mexico.
I mean, you have a lot to do, isn't it, Alba? But I grab a couple of words: building capacity through sharing experiences. And I think the goal of today's webinar is exactly into this, into what you said about that. Now I ask to Ryan Judd. Ryan, could you tell us more about the Green Finance Institute in the UK? Thank you, Ryan.
Great, thanks, Alessandra. And thanks to ESGeneration Italy and SRI Weeks for organising today and inviting everyone together. This discussion on international interoperability taxonomies is incredibly important, and we'll be discussing this more later. But as Alessandra said, so I'm Ryan Judd. I'm the Programme Director for Green Taxonomy at the Green Finance Institute. My role here, we are coordinating the Secretariat for the Green Technical Advisory Group, a group of independent advisors advising the UK government on the green taxonomy. But the Green Finance Institute, or the GFI more widely, is an independent organisation that was set up by the UK government and launched in mid-2019 with an announcement in the UK government's Green Finance Strategy. Setting up the Institute was a key recommendation in the previous Green Finance Task Force that the government had appointed, which was a group of experts who provided a series of recommendations as to how we can green the UK financial system and the UK economy. And one of those recommendations was setting up what became the Green Finance Institute. The Institute was part funded by the UK government and the City of London Corporation. We now also receive additional funding for some of our specific programmes. But we are independent of these organisations, and we work in partnership closely with government, financial services, and key stakeholder groups. We set up mission-led coalitions to convene these stakeholder groups to address barriers to deploying green capital, but all with a focus on driving forward the green finance agenda. And crucially, with collaboration. So collaboration across sector and ensuring that people are sharing knowledge so that no one's reinventing the wheel, and we are being as efficient as possible on this really important topic. There are two broad pillars to the Green Finance Institute's work. One is financing green, and one is greening finance. Now, these might sound similar, but the difference is very important. Financing green is working to create or scale new green finance products to get capital into environmentally friendly activities. We do this through a series of sector-based coalitions, one in the building sector, one in transport, one in nature, and various other pieces of work. But then we also have the greening finance, which is more about the building blocks and the regulation to green the financial system. This is where our work on green taxonomy fits in, as well as our work on the Secretariat of the Task Force of Nature-related Financial Disclosures and some of our work on carbon markets. But I will go into more detail on the green taxonomy work in the next part of the webinar.
Exactly. The second round will be fully dedicated to taxonomy. Now we move to Cheng-Lin.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Hi.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
likewise.
Very well.
I would also like to extend my gratitude for invitation from ESGeneration and also SRI. So as a self-introduction, I'm Cheng-Lin from Beijing Institute of Finance and Sustainability. We are holding the FC4S Asia Pacific Secretariat as well, covering Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Hong Kong as well. So we are kind of mixed in promoting collaboration on green finance and also domestic green financial market. So domestically, we are helping the governments and also market to scale up the green financial market. And so far, I think we've made some progress already by building up a 5-pillar green financial system. The 5 pillars are taxonomy or classification, information disclosure requirements, a suite of product innovation, and supporting and the incentive mechanisms, as well as the international collaboration and the capacity building. And so far, I think China has been making great success in developing the green financial market. And by end of the third quarter this year, the green loans market exceeded 20 trillion RMB, a 40% growth year on year comparing to last year. And the green bond market also saw a 60% growth compared to last year. And the first 9 months issuance of new green bonds already exceeded the whole month last year. And as one of the most important things, as I said, I think taxonomy should have contributed a lot, which I think we'll discuss a lot in detail in the second round. And internationally, we're also supporting a lot of initiatives, including the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, which my boss, Dr. Ma Jun, is co-chairing with US co-chair. And also back to 2016 and 18, we are co-chairing the Green Finance Study Group with the BOE counterparts. And in addition to the G20, we also were involved and partially, I think, contributing to some of the work streams, including the Network for Greening the Financial System among the central banks and the financial regulators, as well as the ItaSIF, which I think has produced one of the most important products is the Common Ground Taxonomy, which I will also discuss in more details later today. So with that, I'd like to hand back to you, Alexandra.
Yes, thank you, Cheng-Ling. And now I leave the floor to Florian Ruella. Florian.
Hi, Alexandra.
Hi, good afternoon. If you can tell us more about your financial center.
My pleasure. First and foremost, I would like to thank ESGeneration for the invitation and greet also my fellow speakers and fellow FC4S members. So a couple of words about Finance Montreal as an introduction. Finance Montreal is the Quebec financial cluster. Basically, we are a non-profit organization created in 2010 by financial institutions at the invitation of the government of Quebec. Our mission is quite simple to understand. It's to promote and develop the Quebec financial industry through consultation, mobilization, and consultation to make Quebec a competitive, attractive, and innovative financial center. So far, we have more than 50 members among all the Canadian financial landscape, whether we're talking about banking, insurance, asset managers, asset owners, legal and consulting firms, and professional associations and universities. Our main activities gravitate around 4 pillars. The first one is on innovation and financial technologies. Finance Montreal is the operator of the Montreal FinTech Station, some kind of hybrid incubator / accelerator dedicated to the growth of the fintech industry in Montreal and in Canada. The second pillar of our activities is dedicated to the international financial centers. So basically the attraction of foreign direct investment in Montreal with international financial institutions to develop in Montreal front, middle, and back offices functions. The third pillar is on talent development to bridge the gap around the needs on talent to support the growth of our industry and our financial center. And finally, the last pillar is on sustainable finance. So I am the vice president in charge of sustainable finance for Finance Montreal. And through our sustainable finance initiative, we try to foster the emergence of sustainable finance in Quebec by bringing around the table leading financial institutions together to integrate ESG issues while seeking positive benefits for the economy and the communities as well. And why we try to do this is because we are in a good position to make sure that Montreal and the province of Quebec will be recognized in a couple of years as one of the leading centers for excellence around innovation in sustainable finance in North America. And in sustainable finance, our initiatives are dedicated to the promotion and the raise of awareness. For instance, we are organizing the Sustainable Finance Summit each year. We also make sure to develop the capacity to build the capacity of the ecosystem and also the education. We have launched last year the statement by the Quebec Financial Center for Sustainable Finance. So far, we have more than closely to 40 signatories representing $1.4 trillion of asset under management, altogether dedicated to the development of the local ecosystem and the expertise in ESG and sustainable finance. We are also developing the ecosystem around ESG and sustainable finance. Finance Montreal will be responsible next year to design and develop the sustainable finance roadmap for the government of Quebec. And finally, we are also involved in many pan-Canadian and international cooperation through the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. Montreal is one of the two main offices for this new international organization dedicated to the development of global standards around sustainability. Obviously, we are also an active member of the FC4S, and through the FC4S, we have launched also strategic partnership with some members, for instance, Finance for Tomorrow in Paris. We have a partnership with them to make sure that we have some kind of convergence for our two financial centers on impact finance, on talent, on biodiversity, and fintechs as well. So very pleased to be here today and looking forward for the discussion.
Thank you, Florian. Before moving to the second round of questions, let me suggest to our audience, if you have any questions or curiosities, please use the chat. If at the end of the round table, as I hope, we remain with a few minutes left, it will be my care to pose your questions to our guest. Now we move to the core topic of this panel, which is sustainable taxonomy. First of all, let me ask to Alba to picture the situation in Mexico. Please, Alba, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alessandra. First of all, I have to say that the working group of sustainable taxonomy in Mexico is part of the Sustainable Finance Committee that works under the Stability Board of the financial system and is led by the Ministry of Finance and the Mexican Central Bank. The sustainable taxonomy is highly innovative as it integrates green and social activities. And we are part of this group as observers with all of the financial associations that we were invited to the discussion and the working group. The Mexican Sustainable Taxonomy is a classification system to identify activities and investments that contribute to the fulfillment of sustainable objectives in the medium and long term. It is a tool for participants of the financial system and stakeholders from the public and private sectors, and is based on technical criteria that determine the degree of sustainability and substantial contribution. The main objective, of course, is mobilize public and private resources, mobile and private capital to the sustainable activities. Our background, if I would like to say that we have taken as a reference the taxonomy of the European Union, of course, the green taxonomy, the climate bonds initiative standards, and the green taxonomy of Colombia recently launched on this year. And we also used a pilot project of green taxonomy for banking sector. It was developed by the Mexican Banking Association. We think that the benefits that the sustainable taxonomy, we believe that it will be a common reference, a common language for the financial market. It contributes also to the mobilization of capital towards sustainable activities. It generates better information for the market, also can contribute to the mitigate greenwashing and now social washing also, and aligns the public and private sector efforts to meet environmental and social objectives. We also think that new incentives and instruments could be created as a second second phase. For example, specialized and mobilized and more flexible credit lines, access to new sustainable debt markets, economic and financial policy incentives could be created, and reports and all the disclosure around the ESG must be aligned with indicators and sustainable metrics. The construction process is in the right side of the picture, and we started on November 2020. The working group for sustainable taxonomies created with the participation of regulators, supervisors of the market, and all the financial associations. In 2021, the environmental and social objectives were established. The economic sectors and priority activities were identified, and also we identified the users and the reporting guidelines that we have to see in this entire work. In 2022, the expert groups were created. This is the most complex work, I have to say, and these were integrated by public and private sector, for the academia, civil society, and international organizations. And the technical criteria by activity is under development. It is considering definitions, of course, for each activity, the assessment technical criteria, the thresholds, the metrics, and the no significant harm to other objectives. And of course, in the last months of this year, we are in a phase of socialization and training process has begun. It's important to say that all the activities are related between and we are very kind of that the social activities must to be care the environmental objectives, and all the environmental activities must to care the social objectives. And the last thing in 2023, it would be the launch of the final document. There will be a period of transition between voluntary and mandatory phase. And of course, a continuous updating will be required during all the years, and the possibility, of course, to integrate new activities. We have environmental activities, 5 environmental activities in the first phase: mitigation and adaptation to climate change, management of water and marine resources, conservation of ecosystem and biodiversity, circular economy, pollution prevention and control. And the side of the social objectives, we have a special group, thematic group, about gender equality and sustainable cities. And we have the other objectives around health, education, and financial inclusion. The sectors that experts groups focus on are right now in the first phase: energy, transport, construction, manufacture, and waste management. And it's important to say that any of these sector has more than 5 or 6 activities identified, and it is planned to have more, of course, activities taking into account the evolution of technologies and the market innovation. And that's it, the main work that we have.
Thank you, Alba. A lot of similarities with what is going on here in Europe, but also the idea if I correctly understood, to move in parallel with the environmental and the social objectives, which is of course of great interest. Now we move to Ryan Jude. Ryan, what's going on in the UK?
Thanks,
Tell us
Alessandra.
more about that.
So I'm planning on doing this from a slightly different angle, where I'm going to talk about our approach, the work of the GTAG to it in the UK, timeline, and some of our thoughts on international interoperability. So if we start on slide 4, the first few are just an introduction to who we are. These slides are going to be made available later as well. This one. So the taxonomy in the UK, in June 2021, the then UK Chancellor announced a new independent expert group that was going to advise on the green standards for investment, and that was the Green Technical Advisory Group. The Green Finance Institute chairs the Green Technical Advisory Group via our Executive Director, Ingrid Holmes, and we also provide the Secretariat function to it, which is what I lead. The GTAG provides non-binding advice to governments on the implementation and design of the taxonomy. Now, an important thing to note here is that we use the EU taxonomy as our base framework in the UK. So before Brexit, before the UK exited the European Union, we onshored that base regulation. This meant we have the same framework, the 6 environmental objectives and the 3 pillars, the significant contribution, do no significant harm, and the minimum social safeguards, which is an important point for international interoperability, as I will come to later. We have 22 expert GTAG members, drawn from finance, from business, from academia, and from NGOs, who all provide slightly different perspectives on how a UK taxonomy should be implemented. And we have 5 main workstream areas, which are on the next slide. So again, you don't need to read these in detail because they will be shared later, but the 5 areas are, first is UK specific needs. So as we look at the EU taxonomy, which we're bringing over to the UK, as we develop the technical screening criteria, when, where, and why would we perhaps need to change any of those TSC? That's what we're looking at in UK specific needs, as well as the use cases in the UK context. The second is on usability and data. The main part of this has been on do no significant harm and how it is potentially unusable in its current form from the EU. And we're undertaking work at the minute on ways to potentially streamline and improve this process without undermining the aims behind do no significant harm. The third is then policy links. What other areas could a taxonomy potentially link into? And I'll come to some of that later. The fourth is fully realized taxonomy. We heard earlier about the EU's recommendations on a red, amber, green extended taxonomy. We're currently analysing the potential for that in the UK and if it is something we need right now. And then the fifth, the big one relevant today, is the international interoperability workstream. Could you go to the next slide, please? So why international interoperability? Why is this so important to us in the UK? Well, as Stephen said in his opening remarks, capital is global and the City of London is a global financial hub. So we see international interoperability as being a particularly important piece of advice in the UK context. And pursuing some level of standardization is needed for the international investors and the multinationals that call the UK their home. Our research has shown up to 30 taxonomies being developed. I know Stephen referred to Marjun's comments on 200, and you will hear 20 referred to a lot, but by our parameters, we say it's around 30, not all being developed by countries, but some being market-led initiatives and some from international bodies too. You just heard, for example, the CBI has a taxonomy out there. Now, we will be publishing some of our advice on approach to international interoperability before the end of the year, which I think is very relevant to everyone on this call, and we'll make sure that report is shared around. There are some key recommendations in there, and one of these, which I will refer to a few times, is what we are calling the hierarchy of interoperability. This goes through 4 different parts, which if they are all met, you have complete interoperability. And as you decrease them, you lose a level of interoperability. These are concepts, methodologies, metrics, and thresholds. So the concepts refers to the same environmental objectives. If 2 taxonomies have those same concepts, there is a base level of interoperability. The next is the methodology. If both these 2 taxonomies have the significant contribution, do no significant harm, minimum social safeguard, there is another layer of interoperability. The third is metrics. If the same metrics are used for each activity, again, you increase interoperability. And finally, thresholds. If all the thresholds are the same, then essentially you have the same taxonomy and you are completely interoperable. However, in certain instances, and this is part of our advice in our UK specific needs workstream, you may need that threshold to be different. Perhaps you have a different transition pathway in your country. So you might change that threshold and lose one layer of interoperability. But if the metrics are still the same, if the same underlying data set is being used, then the burden on business is not increased too much. So there's a trade-off here between what works for the country developing the said taxonomy and what is adding extra burden to businesses. Can we go to the next slide, please? So as I mentioned, the UK onshored the base framework from the EU. So the same 6 environmental objectives, and this here is a screenshot from the UK's Greening Finance Roadmap, which announced that the same 6 were going to be included. So from those 4 levels of interoperability hierarchy, we already have the same concepts as the EU. So we already have that first layer. We've also already said we're going to be doing significant contribution, significant harm, and minimum safeguards. So we also have the same methodologies. The work that's going on at the minute is looking at which of these activities may the thresholds be incorrect, and for which of these activities may the metrics not work. And in our recently published public advice, we reference buildings and the way that building energy efficiency is measured in the EU versus the UK being slightly different, and so there potentially being the need to change that. If we go on to the next one. So taking a break from the international picture, I just wanted to give a bit of insight into how taxonomy is being considered in the UK. We're developing our sustainability disclosure frameworks, which will be the reporting regime for the taxonomy. But there are also other policy areas that have already been publicly announced would align with the taxonomy if and when it is published. The first of these is the UK Infrastructure Bank. This is a state-owned bank that has been set up to invest in green infrastructure in the UK, also with a focus on levelling up, which is a priority of the government. They have said in their policy strategic plan that they would align their investments or use it as a screen, use the taxonomy as a screen when it is developed. The second are the green gilts, or the UK green sovereign bonds. The first of these was issued last year, a £10 billion issuance that was over 10 times oversubscribed. This has also, the government has set out in its green financing framework that future investments of green gilts would be aligned to a taxonomy when it's published. The third then is the Financial Conduct Authority, the regulator in the UK, and its labels and disclosures regime. They've set up a series of labels and disclosures for investment products to use, and one aspect of this would be taxonomy eligibility and taxonomy alignment when the taxonomy exists. And the final one I'll touch on is the Transition Plans Task Force. The UK became the first country to say it was going to have mandatory transition plans for UK companies. And the Transition Plan Task Force published their framework at COP27. And again, one aspect of this, one data point, could be taxonomy alignment. So this is the potential wider reach of the taxonomy and how it's being thought about in the UK context. Next slide, please. So I'll quickly just run through these last 2. So this is the timeline for the UK. We're committed to consulting on the first 2 environmental objectives, climate change mitigation and adaptation, then bringing those into law, consulting on the final 4, and then having 3 yearly reviews. You will notice there are no dates on this slide. This is because we, as GTAG, as the Green Technical Advisory Group, have recently advised the government to send a rapid market signal to the market and give serious considerations to amending these timelines to ensure that usability is central. And that's in our public paper that we published in October, which, if you go to the next slide, and then I will wrap up. Mm-hmm. So this is a public resource that we put out last month. This summarizes the first few months of our report, of our advice that we've given to the UK government. We've done this over the last 17 months, and this is just the first few papers covering how to onshore EU technical screening criteria. What should the UK government be considering if and when it needs to change a criteria? So that metrics and thresholds I mentioned earlier. The second then on do no significant harm, we outline why we think there's a usability issue here and what we think options for the future are. And we're now doing that work in private. The third is on international interoperability. So some of the base points that I raised here. And then the fourth is on taxonomy use cases. So some of those I just referenced, but what else could the taxonomy linked to. And I'm happy to discuss any of this specific advice in the Q&A, but I will say that our advice on international interoperability will be the next paper that we publish. And we see this as a good that can be used by other countries, not just for the UK. It will have that hierarchy I talked about earlier, but also lots of other recommendations as to how to improve interoperability in your taxonomies. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Ryan. We look forward reading the paper on international interoperability, which I think is of paramount importance for the discussion we are going to have today. Now we move to Cheng-Ling.
Hi. Yes.
Hi.
Thank you very much. I also have a slide. Let me try to draw it up. Oh, okay. I got it here.
Perfect. Please.
Okay, great. So my title will be, I'll be focusing on the taxonomies developed in China and also the common ground taxonomy that has been mentioned quite a lot of times today. And since it's not a place for us to discuss on technical details, I'll probably focus on 4 questions. So why it is important and what we did and how it worked and also what's next in terms of taxonomy. And we're very happy to say that China is one of the earliest economies in the world that moved very fast in developing a taxonomy. And first question is why we need a taxonomy. Based on our experience of taxonomy development, we have actually 3 sets of taxonomies since 2013. It is clear that taxonomy can provide a very important foundation for the entire green financial system in 4 areas. Firstly, it can prevent greenwashing via providing a basis for labeling or verification, and it can provide a basis for performance measurement and disclosure, and allocation for policy incentives, especially for local governments and subnational ones in China. They are very eager to support more green loans, green bonds issues by local enterprises and financial firms. And lastly, they can also provide a basis for product development by banks and also other financial firms. And as I said, actually, China has 3 sets of green finance taxonomies. The earliest ones was the green loans taxonomy, developed as early as 2013. And then the green bond taxonomy was first released in 2015. Actually, the early versions of the 2 taxonomies were mainly developed to address environmental pollution issues. So if any of you have been to China, especially to Beijing in early 2010 or 2000, you'll realize the environmental pollution, especially air pollution, was very striking. But now with a few years' efforts and also partially due to the development of the green financial market, the environmental pollution issue in China has been significantly improved, especially in Beijing. If you go there again, you will see a totally different world. And then both taxonomies has been updated in 2021 and 2020 respectively to firstly remove some of the environmental solely focused elements like green coal. Clean coal technology has been removed from both technologies, as this technology were able to reduce environmental pollution, but were not helpful in reducing carbon emissions. So China has been has made carbon neutrality pledges, and also the climate and carbon emissions will be the core for green financial system. And the third one of taxonomy is called a catalog of green industries, introduced mainly by the NDRC in 2019. And the green financial market has been mainly focusing or by following the green bond taxonomy in China by issuing the green financial bonds. And lastly, the PBOC, which is central bank in China, is working also on the development of a transition finance taxonomy. As we see, the green finance has been playing an important role in China in the past 6-7 years, but actually the overall ratio of green loans was only than 10%. So that means the rest of the majority of the green loans or the loan portfolio needs to be transitioned from currently non-green to green and zero carbon in future. So transition finance has an important role to play in the next few decades. And here is a chart showing how what we did and how it worked. So since the introduction of the green bond taxonomy in 2015, China actually kicked off its green bond market in 2016. And gradually you can see the chart actually grows very fast. Last year, the total issuance of green bonds exceeded 60, sorry, the number was not right here, was already more than 600 billion yuan. Where this year, in the first 9 months, I think the total issuance already exceeded last year, and is expected to grow for about 66% in the next few months, 1 or 2 months to come. And then on the common ground taxonomy, so as a lot of colleagues have just mentioned, a lot of jurisdictions and economies have been working on development of, let's say, green or sustainable finance taxonomies. And Rian just said it's close to 30. And I think earlier our colleague said just 200 definitions. So I think that 200 is not more like, it's more like a definition. It's not standards or not taxonomy. Currently, we only hear somewhere between 20 or 30 under development or already developed. But the definitions for green finance can be varying from country to country, especially if we take into account like ESG classification and the ESG rating methodologies that could be very, very huge. But however, 20 to 30, it is already a lot. If these taxonomies are developed in silos, the proliferation of taxonomies may exacerbate the problems such as market segmentation, increase the transaction costs, such as green verification costs, and the risk of greenwashing, and may undermine the efforts to promote cross-border green capital flows. And in the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, where they developed the G20 Sustainable Finance Roadmap, there's also a very clear call for improving coordination on alignment approaches. For example, in Action 2, where jurisdictions have been recommended to improve coordination at the regional and international levels. So to answer this call, both China and also the EU's DG FISMA has been working together under the IPSF working group on taxonomy to develop and also release the common ground taxonomy. The first version was released in November last year during COP26, and the final version, our second version, was released in June this year. And this common ground taxonomy has included 72 mitigation activities that share common ground for both the EU and China taxonomies. And I think the development was largely following the hierarchy described by Rian, 4 things, including concept, methodology, thresholds, and metrics. And the common ground taxonomy actually has a very important role to play. For example, can be used by different stakeholders like issuers, investors, jurisdictions, and other stakeholders in various ways on a voluntary basis. And since its launch of the common ground taxonomy, we have seen quite a lot of issuance of green bonds labeled under the common ground taxonomy, including those financial firms based in China issuing bonds in the EU, and also EU-based financial firms issuing green bonds labeled by the green common ground taxonomy in China. And there are a few scenarios for application of the common ground taxonomy. Here are a few. One thing is the tool for comparing different taxonomies, not only between China and the EU. Maybe in the future we can consider extending the coverage and also a coverage of both mitigation, adaptation, and also other sustainability areas. In the meantime, to include more taxonomies from other jurisdictions and economies. And the second thing is to develop and label green financial products, which are existing, but actually can be relabeled by using the common ground taxonomy. And for example, in China alone, the existing green bond market was more than 2 trillion RMB. And most of them were not labeled by CGT. And actually, many of them can be labeled as CGT, where the overseas investors coming to China can just recognize the green bonds are aligned both in China and the EU, while same versa for many other economies who are issuing green bonds. And the third thing is can be used as a reference for developing taxonomies in other economies, especially for those who intend to develop their own taxonomies as a reference. For example, in May this year, Sri Lanka Central Bank launched a green finance market taxonomy with the IPSF's common ground taxonomy as one of its benchmarks. And the last thing is can be used as the baseline building block. For example, we can consider the possibility of using a building block approach to promote the harmonization of global taxonomies. And just to give you an energy, the harmonization of different taxonomies is more like finding the overlapping part of taxonomies. The more we compare, actually, the smaller the overlapping part could be. And how to make sure the overlapping part of taxonomies is not minimized in the end after comparing 20 or 30 taxonomies. So we probably need to build a baseline or more like a building block approach. But how to do this is also something we can discuss and in the next maybe years or decades to come. So with that, I'll stop here and I would like to take some questions if possible.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I move to Florian for the last presentation of taxonomy, in this case in Canada and Montreal in particular. Please, Florian.
Thank you, Alessandra. First and foremost, apologize because I don't have any slides. I will try to keep myself as concise and clear as possible. As Ryan has shown on his map, the taxonomy is under development in Canada, but I will start by giving you a little bit of context. Back in May 2021, the federal government created the Sustainable Finance Action Council, or SFAC, to help the Canadian financial sector to move towards the integration of sustainable finance into their practices. The primary mandate of the SFAC is to make recommendations on critical market infrastructures needed to attract and develop sustainable finance in Canada in 3 areas: climate-related disclosure, climate data and climate analysis, and finally, green and transition taxonomy. And on this last point, the objective is to provide guidance and recommendation to the Ministers of Finance and Environment and Climate Change Canada on the definition on green and transition investment. The SFAC has convened a taxonomy technical expert group to provide the leadership and expertise needed. So just a quick introduction on the Canadian taxonomy under development. So in general, and my fellow speakers have mentioned it, that taxonomies simplify a complex set of entries to create some kind of memory head for comparing sustainable performance that can be used to evaluate existing or proposed activities, investment, projects, and so on. Whereas a green and transition taxonomy establishes criteria for selecting which economic activities, assets, projects, or income streams are of higher or lower transition risk. So on one hand, transition activities include decarbonizing emission-intensive activities that are essential to sectoral transformation and consistent with a 1.5-degree net zero transition trajectory. For instance, the installation of low-emission furnace to produce steel. And on the other hand, we have green activities, which include low or zero emission activities, for instance, solar or wind energy production, or those that enable them, for instance, hydrogen pipelines. So what are the expertise applications for the Canadian taxonomy? The taxonomy can be useful for a broad range of stakeholders, investors, companies, regulators in the area where benchmarking would be helpful on carbon neutrality, transition planning, on risk management, on climate disclosures. And the taxonomy is also a critical tool to accurately tracking success by having a common definition of transition investments. And finally, the taxonomy is also intended to be part of a broader toolkit to support rapidly expensive green activities, decarbonize higher emitting sectors, and move away from high-risk transition activities. So with the inclusion of transition, what we are doing in Canada, which is not commonly found in the 20 or so current taxonomies published in different regions of the world, the goal here in Canada is to create more opportunities to finance and support activities to reduce emissions and improve resilience in the real economy. So what are these opportunities for Canada? First and foremost, you have to keep in mind that there is a huge challenge to close the climate investment gap in Canada. This gap is estimated at 150 billion annually. So the taxonomy will provide a tool to promote capital allocation and business decisions that are consistent with Canada's climate goals and transition pathways. Second, the green bond market in Canada and globally has grown. And the taxonomy will supported by green taxonomies that have created investor confidence in the green label. So a science-based taxonomy for transition will help build investor confidence in the transition label and reduce the risk of greenwashing associated with sustainability projects. And it is also essential for Canada to develop a transition finance market that can provide a reliable source of capital over time for Canadian companies with credible transition plans. And third, in the absence of a Canadian taxonomy, it could result in the omission of some sectors or activities of importance to Canada, or the adoption of criteria that are inappropriate in the national context. So far, the development of a global taxonomy has focused only on green activities, but the work is starting to extend to transition activities. And transition is more challenging and is of strategic interest to Canada, given the importance of the oil and gas sector, the natural resources sectors as well, and the industrial sectors to the Canadian economy. And however, developing a green and transition taxonomy requires a permanent governance structure, stable funding, significant expertise, and ongoing review. But there is already a vast pool of knowledge and expertise in Canada that could mobilize to accelerate the development and implementation of a Canadian taxonomy. So the expected benefits of a Canadian taxonomy should seek to support the achievement of other objectives critical to Canada's transition. For instance, in the economic landscape, we can think about the improvement of resilience and competitiveness of the Canadian economy in a global transition to a low-carbon economy. On the financial aspect, to reduce transition risk in the financial system and leverage private sector capital to align with a global transition. And finally, on the social aspect, to facilitate the transition for workers and the families, communities, and also indigenous people, which are very, very important in Canada, as you may know. And finally, regarding the next step and the implementation, from this fall to the next summer, the expert group will publish an abstract for the taxonomy covering priorities area and activities. The expert group will also lay the foundation of a long-term implementation of the taxonomy regarding the governance, the funding, and the strategic planning. And finally, starting in the summer of next year, we are going to be in the full implementation led by the federal government and the SFAC. And we are expected to have the approved taxonomy to be published by the end of 2025. So in a nutshell, that's where we are in Canada regarding the taxonomy.
Thank you, Florian. If you can also in the next few days just share with us a couple of slides, that would be really helpful so that we can study and go again through what we have been listening till now. We now have 2-3 minutes left before the end of this session. We received a few questions. I selected a couple of them. The first one is about the debate that we have for sure here in Europe, but maybe in other countries, on the necessity to introduce labels, such as the green label for investment products. Is this something necessary, or disclosure and transparently should be more than enough to reach the goal of moving capitals? I don't know if Chenglin or Ryan, if you would like to pick up this question, please, Chenglin.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to maybe do the first cut, and Ryan can just add on that. So for that question, I'm very happy to share my thoughts. Just in case of China, we develop green finance for two purposes. Firstly, of course, we want to make sure the awareness on climate and environmental risks are aware of in the market, especially by investors and also by the regulators when they are trying to understand if the financial system do not price wrongly, the environmental and the climate risks. And on the other hand, we also are trying to make sure the green sectors are able to finance or at least get finance at affordable costs for future development. Sorry. So in a nutshell, we want to make sure, especially in China's case, or maybe many other developing countries as well, the development of green or sustainable finance is serving two purposes. One thing is to make sure the risks are properly managed and, of course, felt in the market. And on the other hand, we are going to make sure green projects that can generate positive environmental and climate benefits are able to finance the amount of money they need. So both scaling up and also risk management. So that's why I think labeling is still important to make sure the the project owners of green and sustainable projects are able to get the finance. While in the meantime, in the market, investors are aware of the potential climate and environmental risks stemming from climate change. And sustainable finance is also supposed to address that risk issue.
Thank you, Chen-Lin. And Ryan, I think you should add something more of what's going on in the UK around this debate.
Yeah, thanks. So firstly, I do agree on the need for labels, but this is a question of different tools for different outcomes. And so in the UK, I mean, the taxonomy in general, the taxonomy is a transparency tool. It's to give that data to the market. It in of itself is not a disclosure regime. You then need alongside it disclosure regimes. We have SFDR and CSRD in the EU. We're going to develop SDR in the UK. And as part of that in the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority, the regulator here, is developing labels and disclosures. Now, I think the really important part here is what is the difference there? So the labels to be placed on investment products, if that's to help retail investors, individuals, to identify what is really green and where greenwashing is occurring, and that is fantastic. That is exactly what it should be doing. The disclosure side of things then is part of that. Disclosure is where you can add on the taxonomy percentage. And I touched on this in my presentation, how the FCA has proposed these labels and disclosures where you give a label to the product and underneath it, as part of the disclosure, you can put taxonomy percentages. The EU started running into an issue which a few people have pointed out, and then there is work to fix this, where the disclosure was de facto becoming the label. So Article 8 and Article 9 funds were de facto becoming how people were distinguishing between things. And that's something we need to avoid. But I'm fully supportive of labels. If the label is a bigger picture, higher level thing with various aspects being put into it, like the FCA is proposing in the UK, and then taxonomy as a disclosure, as a data point underneath it is included, then that's how we can make sure they all work together to get the outcomes we need.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. The second question is about the perception of investors about having a legal framework coming from public authorities in defining sustainable finance. Alba, Florian, which is your view based upon your experience? Alba, please.
Yeah, thank you, Alessandra. I think the possibility of legal framework in our case, the period between the voluntary application and the mandatory phase is a reality, and I think the legal framework is welcome from the investors. I think that I believe that they are very concerned about the greenwashing, and they have commitments around their portfolios and the carbonized portfolios and make a better decision process in the when they allocate resources. They need more transparency, and I think it would be great for the companies where they are investing if they have better disclosure. They need better data. ESG data is not enough right now. They need more transparency, but the important thing is they need a useful data. They have data, but it is not useful right now. And I think taxonomy could be a very important tool to have standardized data, more with a very comparison between the data in the same industries, for example. And another thing that is very important, that they need more quantity data than quality, than no quality, than no more quantity than more how you say that, when you don't know the exactly metric, but you say a lot of things around the same action, but you don't apport, and you don't put the metric exactly. More quantity than the other data that is only a kind of history and is not a real action. And this is, I think, this is a concern for all the investors right now.
We perfectly understand what you mean, Alba. Exactly. Florian, do you have anything to add in terms of investor perception?
I think that currently investors are waiting for such framework around the globe. I mean, without clarity on the horizon, where what we try to achieve on climate change, on sustainability in general, we can make sure that capital allocation is fully aligned with these objectives. So taxonomies and generally the frameworks around sustainability are very important and well received by industry. But I will add to what my colleague said on this question, that the governance around the development of taxonomies is very, very, very important. Actually, it's a key element of a success on the taxonomy. And if you want to make sure that the taxonomy is fully understand by market participants, whether we're talking about corporates or financial institutions, the development of a taxonomy should rely on a joint governance between public authorities, financial industries, institutions, and with a strong stakeholders participation in all working group dedicated to the development of the taxonomies or such frameworks. And it is also important that in the governance, that we keep in mind that the governance need to be transparent and result-oriented as well, and preserve the scientific integrity of the taxonomy. And also that in my presentation, I talk about the funding on the development of the taxonomy, and it is very important that the resources are proportionate to the size and the scope of initiatives. So in my point of view, the governance around the development of the taxonomies is key in the success of such initiatives, and are well welcomed by financial institutions if they can participate in the development of the taxonomies.
I think, Florian, that you touch on, again, on the necessity of a multi-stakeholder approach. Yeah. Which is something that we absolutely embrace as ESGeneration Italy, and through the organization which decided to establish ESGeneration Italy. Unfortunately, our time is over. We need to conclude. Let me thank you again, Alba Aguilar, Consiglio Consultivo de Finanzas Verde. Thank you, Alba. Ryan Jude, Green Finance Institute. Thank you, Ryan. Cheng Ling, Institute of Finance and Sustainability. Thank you for being with us. And Florian Ruella, Finance Montreal. Thank you, Florian. And now I leave the floor to Francesco Bricciato. Francesco is the Executive Director of Forum per la Finanza Sostenibile. Francesco, the floor is yours to conclude such an amazing afternoon with our guests. Please, Francesco.
Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you really to everybody, and for the brilliant contributions that we have today. Our aims was to promote the dialogue between different models of sustainable finance, and I think that it worked. Really interesting. We had a perfect examples of engagement trying to align our activities, first of all, to Agenda 2030. An important purpose that it seems that we have in common beyond the formal taxonomy is transparency. Transparency is quite important, and at the same time, the fight against the greenwashing, and it's something that I think that we have in common. In this sense, the legal framework is quite important. For us, it's quite important, but of course, it's not enough. We need to increase, above all, the awareness of retail and institutional investors, and this awareness is also to work together with the public sector. So we think that the public-private partnership is essential. Okay, we hope that environmental, social, and geopolitical emergencies, this is something that we hope, don't slow down the process of just transition. Even because in front of global emergencies, we need global solutions and multilateral approach in this sense. Thanks a lot to Stephen and the FC4S and UNDP work that they are carrying out. Data sharing, experience sharing, financial practice sharing could lead to a sustainable finance globalization, looking for common solution against climate change and social inequalities. So at the end, as a ESGeneration, our commitment is to support FC4S and its members, and so we can say that ESGeneration Italy will continue to do its part, and we hope also that this is only the first step of international dialogue in order to strengthen the role of sustainable finance at worldwide level. So thank you very much. Thanks to everybody, and I hope that we have soon the opportunities to meet together. Thank you, and bye.